grab hold of one little thing. So the sort of things there, people talk about labour, or actually we talk about building materials. It's one I quite often quote. So when we've got about almost 4,000 projects in our database, and so we're able to start analysing those projects and we're doing more working on that to try and gain some learnings out of it. And one thing is that the building materials, so the stuff that is bought from a building supplies merchant, is only about 12% of the total building cost. And so all of this focus around bringing in more materials and more suppliers, yes, it's probably going to help, and it's probably going to add some competition into that, but we're only playing in sort of a 12% part of the building.
Welcome to the Smart Living Spaces vlog. I am Sharon, architectural and passive house designer. I'm also a Homestar professional located here in New Zealand. It's my mission to make healthy, comfortable, energy efficient and affordable homes for everyday people. So come on a journey with me where I share my knowledge gained over the last couple of decades, because we aren't going to be building better if people don't understand and see the value in changing what we are creating. So hi, I'm Sharon, architectural and passive house designer at Smart Living Spaces, and I help people design homes that are comfortable, healthy and energy efficient and truly fit the way that they live their life today. Now today I want to talk building costs. It's a hot topic. A common question people ask is how much? And who best to explain this all than a QS? So I have got Nick Clements from YourQS here. Now Nick is a quantity surveyor and is a collaborator with Small Smart Spaces. He understands building costs far more than most. So here is Nick answering my questions, because I think these are answers. I think the answers that he gives is really valuable information that most people who are building a new home or renovating an existing one should know about. So hello everyone, I am with Nick, who is a quantity surveyor. Now not everyone might know what you do, Nick, so just explain to me, like I'm Joe Blogs, what is it that you do and how do you fit into this whole process of building?
Yeah, so quantity surveyors, we understand building costs, and so our typical role in the process is helping people in building projects to work out what the cost of the project's likely to be. I somewhat cheekily say that the best way to work out what the building cost is add up the invoices at the end of the project, but would say that's going to be the most accurate way. But the problem with that is it's too late to affect anything, and so the whole idea behind where a quantity survey adds value is understanding what the cost impacts are of the decisions as early as in the process as possible, so that you can make decisions about what you do and how you do it before it gets too expensive.
Yes. Well, that leads me beautifully into the next sort of part of my question, which is you're often engaged by builders and architects and architectural designers, but I should imagine that's usually at the detailed documentation stage. So when is the best time to start having conversations and bringing you into the process?
Yeah, so with any sort of project, the further you get into the project, the more expensive it is to make a change. So if you're at building consent, or say you're after building consent and you decide to change something, it's then really expensive because you maybe you've ordered stuff, you've got to go back to council and apply for a change. So my view is the earlier you understand the cost implications of the choices that have been made, the better decisions you can make, and the easier it is to make those decisions. So we probably sort of 50% of our work would be at detail consent drawing stage and then 50% at concept stage. I think the concept stage is actually where we add the most value. So by the time it's at building consent and we're, say, working with a builder to put their price together for their client, it's sort of, we're adding value because we're helping the builder do their work, but in terms of the overall picture of the build, I don't know if we're adding that much value. Whereas at that concept stage, which may be as little as a floor plan and a few elevations, we're able to start giving the homeowner and the designer a feel for what the cost's likely to be. And so then it's really easy to say, okay, well, this is going to be way more expensive than we thought. Let's make it smaller or change the claddings or whatever. So basically as early as it possibly can.
Early as possible. Well, that's good to know with the concept stage, because that's a stage where obviously the more detail you get, the more accurate the pricing can be. But that would be what you would call a high level estimate at that point. So it's loosely showing you the direction that the project's going cost wise.
Yeah, for us, our process is a bit different to traditional QSs. So traditional QSs at that high level stage would use something like square meter rates or elemental square meter rates to basically build up a cost. And that works and it gives you a number. Our methodology is we create a 3D model of the building and then use that 3D model to drive the costing process. So we do exactly the same process from our end of things, whether it's a detailed drawing or a concept plan. The only difference is the assumptions that we've got to make in that model. So when we drop in a wall, we may be making some guesses at what the size of the lintel is going to be, whereas by the time we get to the detailed drawings, we'll know exactly what it is and what the connections are. So for us, the process is the same. The only thing that differs is the assumptions that we're making. And the reason why that is because our technology basically allows us to do it. So I don't see any reason in doing a simplified method where it's going to take us about the same time and you're going to end up with more sort of thumbsuck numbers, more guesses in it. So so we basically do the same process, but you've definitely, even though it looks like it's really accurate and it'll have like a count to how many nails there are, it's only as good as the assumptions that we've made for doing it.
But you are making allowances for like those fixings and those little hidden costs that add in and creep. And just quickly, it works really well with the 3D modeling software that a lot of architects and architectural designers use as well, don't you? You've built something to easily create that collaboration and integration?
Yeah, so at the moment, the bulk of what we do is recreating effectively the 3D model over the top of PDFs, but we've developed plugins for the two main tools that most designers use, so Revit or ArchiCAD, and what that allows them to do is export the main components of the model across into our system. We've got that working, but we've not been pushing it that hard because what we've got coming next year is we want to try and create a live link between the design model and our costing system. So we're basically concentrating on that. So we do have the ability to be able to import the model in, but I've not really pushed it. It's it's sort of a step on the journey that we're looking to go to, with my whole idea being that the faster we can make it, or the more easier we can make it for the designer to understand the cost implications of their decisions, the better it is for everybody. And so if we can make that real time or close to it, then that's going to be great for everybody.
Yeah, I love that you're looking at the whole BIM, because BIM's been something we've talked about a lot in the industry, and there's a preconception that if it's done on one piece of software, it's easily going to talk to the other piece of software. So it's a space we're figuring out in real time. Now, when you and I first met at the Certified Builders conference earlier this year, there was something that stood out for me with our conversation, because you talked about affordability and saying it's not just one thing within the project that drives affordability. I think the general public like to look for the silver bullet that's going to make their project affordable. So what's the one revelation, I suppose, that you can explain to the public, or that you see you would have seen a lot of conversations with builders and clients about cost and picking them up off the floor, I should imagine. What is the one revelation that you can give to people about price that just might bust some myths or stories that they have around that?
Yeah, I guess it's not going to be an easy answer. And like you say, there's no silver bullet. Yeah, it's fine. That's what we do all day, every day. So I'm happy to make a long answer. Certainly you're sort of in the political debate and the sort of sphere of everybody talking about building costs. Everybody seems to be looking for this one magic thing. So whether it's importing cheaper chipboard, that's going to solve the building cost. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. And if it was, somebody would have done it a long time ago. And so when you look at a house, it's actually a really complex thing. A typical housing project involves 40, 50, 60, 70 different trades. So different organizations involved in that building. There's 4,000 to 8,000 parts in it. And so it's a complex thing. It's a complex project. There's a lot of challenges in it. And lots of little things add up to a big cost. So you can't just grab hold of one little thing. So the sort of things people talk about labor, or actually we talk about building materials. It's one I quite often quote. So when we've got about almost 4,000 projects in our database, and so we're able to start analysing those projects and we're doing more working on that to try and gain some learnings out of it. And one thing is that the building materials, so the stuff that is bought from a building supplies merchant, is only about 12% of the total building cost. And so all of this focus around bringing in more materials and more suppliers, yes, it's probably going to help, and it's probably going to add some competition into that, but we're only playing in sort of a 12% part of the building. The carpentry labour is about 20%, so that's a big chunk, and that is a different. There's no easy answer again with that to be able to drop it. So obviously labour rates, wages across the economy have increased. So the rates that builders have got to pay for their labour has increased. So their labour cost has increased. The main opportunity to gain efficiency in that, to me, is organisation is scheduling, is being able to manage the projects more efficiently. So there's definitely opportunities to improve in that, but that is then quite difficult to do, because to actually get that degree of coordination, to be able to reduce the costs material is quite challenging. And then if you look at that, the rest of the building, about 60% of it is subcontractors. So that's windows, frame and truss, roofing, plumbing, electrical. And if you analyse those, around 50% to 60% of them is labour as well. So you've got a big portion, somewhere between 50% and 60% of the total building is actually the labour cost of all of the people that are involved in that project. So that is pretty sticky, because the only way you can really lower it is either drop wages, which nobody's going to want to do, or reduce the amount of time you've got to put into the project. And that comes down to being more efficient, more productive, and that's easy to say but difficult to do. So there isn't a silver bullet. So in terms of a homeowner trying to say, how can I end up with a more efficient building, there's probably two big drivers. So one is the size of it, that if you want a lower cost building, make it smaller. It sort of sounds like a truism, but in reality it is a lot. You look at, when I was first getting into the housing market, a 90 square metre 3-bedroom home with 1 bathroom, no garage, that was sort of the entry point. You look at now, the entry point is probably 200 square metres with an integrated garage, 2 bathrooms, tiled floors. So yes, houses are a lot more expensive to get into, but they're sort of twice or more the size. So the size of the buildings that we're building definitely has an impact on the cost of them. And then the other one would be complexity, that the simpler you can make the shape of the building, the fewer materials you can use, the fewer changes in the roof line, the more cost effective it's going to be. And maybe more boring houses. So that's I guess the trade-off. But
Shall we do a little bit of Mies van der Rohe? Simple is good. Let's make it simple but elegant. Yeah. It's interesting that you talk about the simplicity of form, because that ties in really well with high performance homes, because the form is simple. We've got low surface to volume ratio. I asked you that curly question to lead into the next question, because I see a lot of people wanting to tender their projects, 3 or 4 builders. That's a complex process in itself, because you've got to analyze those tenders and see that you're actually comparing apples to apples. And I think people tend to make some assumptions there. But going back to your comment about the materials and the labor, it seems to me that most people in the tendering process is then really comparing 50 to 60% of labor and 50 to 60% of a company's workings, really. And that's what they're challenging to because materials cost what they cost, by the sounds of things.
Yeah, and I'm not a big fan of the tender process, but because I guess I'm really driven by efficiency, and to me it seems an inherently inefficient process. If you've got 2, 3, 4 tenderers, only one of them can win it. So the other 2, 3, 4 people have wasted their time completely, and that cost goes somewhere. It's not like a builder can tender for a house with no cost. That cost's incurred somewhere. Obviously, they're not charging the client in that case, so the client's not wearing the cost, but ultimately it's a cost in the industry somewhere, and it's an inefficiency I don't particularly like, and I don't think, for me, it doesn't guarantee a good outcome. Not that there's any process that's going to guarantee a good outcome. So my preference is, when people ask me, is basically have an evaluation process of your builders, and maybe talk to a number of builders and work out which one you want to work with, and then work with those guys to achieve the outcome that you jointly want to achieve. Like, they need to be making money, so screwing them completely on the price is ultimately going to bite either you or them. And if you screw them too hard, then it's setting up an adversarial environment to start with. And for most people, building a house is one of the biggest things they'll ever do in their lives. And do you want to set up the biggest thing you're ever going to do in an adversarial environment? So I'm much bigger fan of the sort of collaborative approach, and then working with parties on that project that you trust, and building that trust. And I see, and we often I have these discussions with my builder customers as to how do they respond when they get into a tender situation, that by involving somebody like an independent QS in it can help, because I can understand the client, as I said, it's the biggest decision for a lot of them they'll ever make. So how do they get confident they're not getting ripped off? How are they confident they're paying a fair price? And that's where, so going out to a market and getting a whole lot of people to quote is sort of one way of giving yourself some confidence that maybe the price you're getting is in the right ballpark. Involving an independent party like a QS, is another way of doing that as well. So they can provide a view. They don't have a vested interest either way. They, in my point of view anyway, we want to try and set what we think is the most likely price that project's going to be built for. And we're not trying to look after the builder, and we're not trying to look after the homeowner. We're trying to sort of pick that line down the middle. And so, yeah, involving a QS, working out and more on probably reputation and process, and getting builders that have got a good system, because we're saying 50 or 60% of it's labour, then the way they're going to be able to get their labour costs down is by being more efficient. And if they're better organised, got better systems, better processes, they're more likely to deliver you a good outcome from a quality point of view, but also from a cost point of view.
And they're probably more likely to bring great ideas to the table if they're involved early on and have buy-in from the client, instead of just expecting to give that stuff for free without, it's that reciprocity that they're looking for.
Yeah. Yep.
That's really handy, because a lot of people seem to think that if they can get some competition, they're going to be better off. But I love your comment about this is the largest probably financial investment that people are going to make in their lifetime. So it pays to invest with the right people and the right team and the right process.
And is the best price going to give you that outcome?
Yes.
And how often do people select the lowest cost tender? Probably not that often. So, and if anything, it's going to be other characteristics of the tender that they make the decision on, not necessarily the price. And I guess what the point I'm making is, can you identify those characteristics and make the decisions on those characteristics without having to go through this whole tender process?
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, evaluating and comparing them is really challenging. Like, we occasionally get asked to compare. A customer's got prices from a number of different builders, and it's what we do all day, every day, and it's still really difficult to try and figure out what they've allowed and why they've allowed this. And it's and we do quite a bit with builders where the architect sent out a tender document saying, look, we want you to fill it out this way. But then how do you know the builders interpreted things the same way, and when they put it into that particular category, it might all look the same, but have they made the same assumptions as to how it gets allocated into those different cost codes? So it's really difficult to assess them.
I have done some tender analysis under NZIA, and it's the only thing for me that stands out is if one person's price is dramatically lower in an area, the first question I ask is, what have they missed and what have they left out? Because that can come back into the contract, can't it, as a variation, which becomes quite high, because some people load their variations. They go for a very cheap contract price, and then so it's a false economy, can be a false economy for somebody who's building a home.
Yeah, it also depends a bit how the contract's worded as to whether they can get it through as a variation. So if they've made a mistake and missed something, and the contract says that it's included, but they've missed it, that is actually their problem. And so as the purchaser, you could say they have to honour their price, but obviously that's going to hurt them. And if you drive them under, what good does that do everybody in the end? So yeah, it's a spotting somebody making a mistake and letting it carry on through is setting up a problem later on, because at some point they'll discover they've made the mistake, and then they're going to look for some other opportunity somewhere else to try and make that back again, because at the end of the day they've got to make $1 out of it.
Otherwise they've got to run a business. Yeah, and you don't want them to go out of business as a home builder. You want them to still stick around. So I'm going to change tact a little bit out of that sticky ground. You do a little bit of work with the New Zealand Green Building Council, and I know that you had a guy in your office that was learning ECCHO, which is, for those of you who don't know, is the energy carbon calculator for homes, which is a fantastic tool by the NZGBC and is required for Homestar version 5. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing with them, or hoping to achieve with them, and bring to the Homestar and Green Star process.
Yeah, it's still very early days. So where we sort of got into the space is another. I'm good at telling long stories. So it actually goes back to the Constructive conference last year, and I was chatting with Matt Duda from EBOS and Matthew Cutler-Welsh actually, and it was at the time when the Minister of Construction was saying, H1's added $50,000 to the cost of houses, and we were chatting and saying, we just don't believe it. And so we thought, let's do an exercise and look at what the impact is of the changes. So let's go back to what it used to be, what the next iteration was, and then what the current one is, and see what the cost impact of it is. And I was pretty sure it wasn't as bad as what they were saying, and that there was some opportunities there, but we'd never actually done the work, because invariably somebody brings a design to us, we cost that design, and then that's it, job done. We're not going to go away and look at what that design could have been. And so that was the exercise. And so we actually ended up working with certified builders on a couple of their standard plans and looking at what was the impact. So if we designed the house under those different regimes, what was the cost impact of it? And it wasn't actually that great for starters. But then we also identified that if we use something called the calculation method, so currently there's 3 ways of complying with the building code from a thermal perspective. There's the schedule method, the calculation method, and modelling method. So ECCHO fits into the modelling method. The specification method is really quite basic, is you just make sure that each of the main elements that are related to the thermal performance are above a certain standard and tick, job done. Doesn't really account for anything from a performance point of view. The calculation method sort of sits between. It's not as nuanced as the modelling method is, but it's much easier to do, and it's pretty prescribed. And what we did was did an exercise and looked at the modelling method, looked at the calculation method to see whether we could expose more efficient ways of achieving the same outcome. And what it identified to us that there was quite a big opportunity, like a few $1,000s on a design by just working out where the most cost-effective place to invest in your thermal performance is. And through that, we then started talking with the Green Building Council. And while ECCHO is a great tool, it's pretty cumbersome to put all the data requirements for it are pretty cumbersome. And we were able to build a calculation tool into our 3D modeling tool. So we're able to do the calculation method quite efficiently inside our tool. And so the next logical thing to look at is, can we help prepare the information needed for ECCHO directly from the model? So that's sort of what we're working on at the moment. It's quite a bit of work, and I guess the bottom line is somebody's going to have to pay for it.
It's important work though, Nick, because the schedule method and calculation method, most people might not know this, only deal with heat loss in a building. So this is, energy modelling is the way forward. So it's great that there's this, and lots of people don't know the amount of collaboration and conversations that are going on and behind doors, to solve this problem. Because if we had a solution, as you say, with lots of things, we would have found it already. That's great. That's awesome work.
One of our customers said the idea of a 3-leg stool, that the insulation is one part of it, ventilation is the other part, and then vapor barriers. So they're controlling the air movement inside the building is the third part. And so the H1 looks after one of those 3 things. It's not looking after ventilation, it's not looking after air movement. And so whereas the modelling method do take those into account. So there's no question the modelling method is the best thing to do, but at the moment there's quite a high price to it because of the amount of work involved in collating the data together to produce the model. And ultimately, if we can reduce that amount of work down, then that'll make it easier for people to design much more efficient buildings and more livable buildings.
Yeah, got to start somewhere, hey? We do have to start somewhere. That also, just to note that the modelling method's the only way to deal with overheating, and our building code doesn't have a cap on overheating, so it's not just heat loss. What is the biggest change that you're starting to see in the industry? Because our building and construction is going through a bit of a change, a shift. There's building for climate change, which is not being talked about, but is sitting on the horizon. Energy modelling is being talked about a bit. But there's other stuff that's boiling on. What's something that you see brewing in our industry?
Yeah, I sort of feel like at the moment things have stalled a little bit. So I think with the change of government, the attitude towards some of these, and particularly I guess the environmental things, has softened a bit. So I could see it heading towards a carbon calculation being a requirement as part of the consenting process. I could see it heading that way, but not anymore. I think that there's people that the awareness of it is starting to drive it in that direction, but it's not being driven from a regulatory point of view. We're not a fast-moving industry, and I think it's one of the challenges. And you often hear about building industry productivity, and if you look at building industry productivity compared to almost any other sector, it's really bad. And I think a lot of it is because we've been really poor at adopting ways of improving, and we've had a history of not doing it well when we've done it. So if you look at leaky buildings, the whole leaky buildings came from the building code being changed from being prescriptive to being performance-based, and that then opened up opportunities for innovation, but a lot of innovation wasn't well implemented, so you ended up with poorer performing buildings. And so we're now sort of reacting back a bit the other way and starting. with the consenting process, it's almost become prescriptive again, where the councils require so much information and so much of the design to be fully resolved to try and protect themselves from the issues that came out of the leaky building thing. And so that's almost shrinking it back down again to making it really hard to innovate and hard to change things. So it's, yeah, I feel like I'm prevaricating a bit.
No, but these are real issues, and there are a lot of people trying to do really great things, but there is what we want to say red tape, or there are safety safety barriers in place that create knock-ons that aren't desirable in other spaces. And I find our building code quite isolated. Like each of the sections are sort of treated in isolation, but what we're effectively creating is an entire ecosystem. The building is something that's got to work together, and we need to find a way to figure that out. I don't think it's just New Zealand that's struggling.
No. Yeah, I've definitely looked around. Yeah, try and keep an eye on what's going on in Australia and other markets around the world, and definitely the same sort of discussions are happening around housing costs, house affordability. They're the same in the US, the same in Australia. So it's not just us. It's a global challenge, and I think it reflects, like I was saying earlier, is that houses are actually really complex, and they're actually a system that you can't just go fiddling with one bit of it and expect it to not have an impact somewhere else. And because it's so complex and there's so many parties involved and it takes such a long time for it to be created, it's very difficult to innovate and make these changes and identify where the efficiencies are and then execute them. So I've started looking a little bit at simplicity. They've been able to achieve some really quite significant cost reductions, and sort of my initial assessment of it is they're not substantively doing things differently. They're still using the same sort of supply chains that everybody else is, but what they've done is really focus on the coordination, and so they're able to drive their efficiency through being able to get everybody at the right place at the right time with the minimum amount of hassle, the minimum amount of barriers, having good payment processes, good planning processes, so people are willing to put in a really cost-effective price because they know they can deliver the project for that price because simplicity, have everything organised. And I think that's the sort of thing we need to do as an industry, but it's really difficult to do it across a whole lot.
So probably not what we're doing so much, but how we're doing it.
Yeah, I think, because I don't know how much scope there is to change what we're doing. So like we said, there's no magic silver bullet of 3D printing houses or whatever that's going to suddenly make them a whole lot cheaper. So we're stuck with doing what we do pretty much the way we do it. So in terms of the construction methods and the materials and the choices. So it's then really looking at how can we do it more efficiently. And I guess being a technologist, I've always seen technology as part of the solution. And you mentioned BIM. I've been in that space for 20 years, and we're still having the same discussions about BIM 20 years later, and it hasn't really dramatically moved, but I think the potential for it to move has always been there, but we just haven't unlocked it for whatever reason.
What's just popped into my head is, how they say the building code is built for innovation, and you've just highlighted that that's a nice thing to say, but it's a very hard thing to do, that perhaps the innovation that we need to be looking at moving forward is in the process rather than actually in what we're doing. As you say, the collaboration, the early engagement, the building on relationships, streamlining it, efficiencies within the process and people.
And there's very little research or activity. Like you look at brands, they're the Building Research Association New Zealand, they're levy funded, but the bulk of their work goes into products, materials, systems. It doesn't go into process. And I think that's the biggest opportunity is process.
Yeah. Fabulous. Now, I have been on your podcast and I've had a great time. People don't know this, but do you want to tell me a little bit about your podcast and why you started it? What got you into it?
Yeah, actually, what got me into it was a couple of my mates who have got a studio and do public speaking and podcasts and stuff, and they were pestering me to do one. So I thought I'd give it a crack and see what it's like. Being an old fella, so I've not really been into the social media stuff or anything. And it's a lot of our customers, a lot of our builders, social media is a big part of what they do, and we didn't really have a social media presence. So I thought, oh well, I'll give it a crack, and I've really enjoyed it. I've not done it to become an influencer and have millions of viewers. I don't really care. I started doing it because my mates talked me into it, and then I've actually really enjoyed doing it. And I try and get people on that I am interested in learning about their stories and their view of things. So, and basically trying to learn more. So pretty much what you're seeing on the podcast is me learning in real time, and I'm looking for guests and people that are able to expand my knowledge base, and hopefully what I'm interested in, other people are interested in, and learn from it.
Well, I think it's important for us as an industry to realize who else is out there, because we've tend to be in our silos a lot. So I see what you're doing as really a great thing to kind of connecting a whole heap of people that whose paths might not ordinarily have crossed, or offer some information that people might not necessarily have come across. It might be been hidden in a document somewhere, how can people?
I guess just to extend it a little bit, is I'm also as interested in business as I am in building, and so I didn't really have a format or anything when I first sort of started, but it sort of morphed into, I call it cost influencing design. So, but taking a very broad view on all of those aspects of it. So looking at part of cost as how you run businesses and how you be efficient in businesses. So I've actually had quite a few people on from more of a pure business perspective. So I'm interested in exploring both the building industry and the business side of things in it.
Well, they go hand in hand, don't they? So
they do. We're all businesses ultimately.
So it's called Beyond the Guesstimate. I can put a link in this so people can find it. So how can people find you or connect with you if they have a project, or they have some questions, or they want to engage with you in some form? How can they get in touch with you?
The easiest way, we just website yourqs.co.nz. So we've got an inquiry form there that goes through to our shared mailbox, so I get to see it, and my team keeps an eye on it as well. So that would be the easiest way. But you can find me Beyond the Guesstimate. I'm on LinkedIn. I'll do the social media thing. So I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok.
Great.
I'm not dancing on TikTok. But,
You and me both. Nick, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for explaining this just in really plain language for people, so we can help people make better decisions when it comes to building their new home.
Great. It was good to talk to you. Thanks for the opportunity, Sharon.
So a big thank you to Nick for his time. I'm really grateful for him taking time to explain this all to us. Now, Nick can be found on LinkedIn, and I do really recommend his podcast. That's not just because I've been on it. It's called Beyond the Guesstimate. As he explains, he's got a keen interest in both business and also the building costs and the building side of things. And I think that even if you are a builder or you're in the trades, it's highly valuable to key into the wealth of free knowledge that you can gain on his podcast. Now, I find Nick and his team highly collaborative, and I think he's a very important person in the building better space, because as we talked about, building better is not so much in the what, but more in the how we are going about it. Now, understanding is key. So if you're thinking about renovating your home or building a new one, I'd love to have a quick chat with you to see how I can help you and steer you in the right direction that's right for you and your project. The link to arrange that with me at a time that works for you is in the description box below. Now, don't forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe, or you can follow me on the social media platform of choice. It's TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Like Nick, I don't do dances on TikTok. Please follow me. I do daily snippets of just little bits of nuggets that I think people should be knowing about, especially if you are wanting a better home than just a minimum code compliant house. So that's all for me, and I will see you next time.